Here it is March. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. Spring is a very funny season because the temperature springs back and forth between very cold and very warm. We've already had a 70-degree day, and we've also had one in the teens. That's March. Today is kind of a sunny day, but it is a little chilly. The garden, however, is starting to make some spring stirrings, and I'm in my herb garden, and we have a few things coming up. The herb garden is a mess, as you see. It's covered with leaves and plant stalks, and I'll just leave it that way for a couple more weeks because there are insects and chrysalises down in the leaves and small creatures, and we'll just let them be for a while until it's time for them to come out. And then I'll start cleaning up and picking up leaves. But some of the herbs are already starting to make an appearance. And the first things that we'll be harvesting in this garden will be chives. And there's a row of chives here that's just starting to break the ground with their little green shoots. And then we have sorrel, which is also an early plant and a perennial one. So that's starting also to show some life. It won't be long before some of the others start to green up and show a few green stalks and leaves. But not much going on in the herb garden at this time. So we can just kind of wait. It's hard sometimes on the nice days, the ones that are about 70, not to get out and clean everything up right away. But if you've been around New England very long, you realize that in March, you're not likely to have those 60 and 70-degree days continue throughout the month. So you have to take it a little slow in getting ready for the season. Now let's move over to the perennial garden and see what's happening there. Perennial garden has not been cleared yet either, and that's where the majority of our butterflies will be this summer. So possibly we have some of the chrysalises or butterfly caterpillar eggs already in the stalks. And I want to leave those so that they'll be there for me this summer and I'll have lots of butterflies. Bees also make their home in this underbrush and leaves and stalks that are on the ground, and they will be coming out soon. We have some honeybees that have visited some of the early crocuses in back, but we'll be seeing more bees as the weather gets warmer. But I want to leave their home alone for a while. Right now we have some bulbs starting to come up and some foliage on other plants. The dusty miller the lamb's ear and the dianthus have green stalks, and we do have hungry deer. Crocuses are one of their favorites, and I have crocuses starting to come up, so I'm using my deer spray. And we have a lot of daffodils coming up. But fortunately, the deer don't care for those. So if you just have daffodils, don't worry about it. Deer will not eat those. But the hyacinths and the crocuses, particularly crocuses and tulips, the deer will munch on very regularly. So I have all of these starting to pop up. There's a tulip back there. And I want to keep the deer spray on them so the deer and rabbits won't nibble them. As an additional insurance, I will be getting some dried blood. We've had quite a few rabbits around this year, and the rabbits are particularly repelled by dried blood. It's also a good fertilizer for the garden, so I'll be using some of that around the bulbs in hopes of seeing the blooms instead of having them completely eaten. Now let's go over to the other side of the perennial garden. I have some tulips here that I want to make sure I keep sprayed. And we have some little early crocuses blooming already. This area gets quite a lot of sun, so that's always one of the earliest areas. And again, more stalks that will need to be cleaned. More daffodils in back, and we have some other plants that are starting to come. Primroses. And primroses are very hardy. You can buy your primroses now in the grocery store to enjoy inside, But then once you've enjoyed them inside, perhaps as an Easter decoration, you can put them outside and they'll come back year after year, and you can even divide them later on. That one probably could be divided this year and have flowers. They will be blooming in the next month. During the next month, and since I'm doing the show monthly, before the next month, this garden will be cleaned up. Probably either the end of March or early April. I'll be out here clearing the leaves and stalks after we've left them and things have started to warm up a little more. Some plants have a little basal foliage. This is a daisy, and its basal foliage really never browns up in the winter. It stays. You put it on in the fall. The same with poppies. Oriental poppies die over the summer, die back, have no foliage. You can put an annual over the top of them. In the fall, they pull up some foliage that stays all winter, and this will continue to grow, and the poppies will be blooming by May. I'm leaving the basket over my lavenders, and I will remove them when the weather gets a little bit warmer, probably when it stays in the 50s pretty dependably. Again, more crocuses and grape hyacinths, which seem to have been a deer favorite this year. They have been nibbling, or rabbits, I'm not exactly sure which, but I need to keep them sprayed so that we will have some flowers a little later on. Now let's move down to the vegetable garden and see what we can do there to get ready for the season. I grow several kinds of small fruit in my vegetable garden, first of which is raspberries, red raspberries, which we enjoy in late June and July, and they need pruning every spring. I grow two kinds. The first kind is an early one, and it makes new canes each year, and in the spring you cut off the old canes. How do you tell the difference? The old canes really look old. The bark is starting to peel, and you just cut those to the ground. The newer canes will have buds, and they also excuse me, they also look like they're ready to grow. The old ones just look dead. So those are cut off, and I'll burn those and then put some fertilizer on the berries and mulch them with some straw to help keep the weeds down. The next plant I grow are strawberries, and I have put straw over those for the winter, and there are berries under here. Again, once the temperatures are reliably in the 50s, I'll pull off the mulch. Last year I had a row 4 feet wide, and at the end of the season I took out half the row. I've got new strawberry plants on order. You need to kind of redo the berries about every 5 years. They'll last for about that long, and then they start to get small. The plants just don't act as vigorous, and it's time to add new berries. So I've bought some new plants that I'll be planting when they arrive, which will probably be mid-April, mid to late April. And these berries hopefully will provide a few berries for our enjoyment this year, because when you plant new ones, in order to give them a good start, you need to remove all of the blossoms the first year. Hard to do, but it is worth it in the long run for the longevity of the plants. The next crop that we planted in October was the garlic, and you can see that shoots are already coming up through the straw, and I'll leave those shoots there, but I will add some all-purpose fertilizer in the area around them, and if the straw is really matted down, I might loosen it a little. But we have a shoot of garlic coming up about every 6 inches, which is just the way we planted the cloves back in October. We'll continue to let this grow, and it'll start putting on some real good growth soon. One of the things I've been doing in the garden is burning. It's a place that's open, and in Norfolk you need to get a burning permit from the fire department, and that can be done online. You fill out all the necessary paperwork, and you read the rules that they have for open burning. Then on any day that you wish to burn, you need to call the fire department after 10 a.m. and find out if burning is allowed that day. It's been really dry lately, and on really dry or windy days, they do not allow open burning. So you may have to call a couple times before you have a day that it's allowed. And then you need to have your fire out by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You can't start before 10, of course, because that's when you can call, and then you have to put it out. Have a hose handy and take great caution in not letting it get away and burn things that aren't supposed to be burned. We've had a lot of wind lately, so my brush pile has been growing, and we will be burning on one of the days very soon. Now I'm going over here to a couple other fruit crops, and I have rhubarb. And my rhubarb, I have 3 bunches here, and I'm going to add some all-purpose fertilizer around this. Rhubarb's a heavy feeder, so we want to probably do this a couple times. It likes acid soil, and I'm going to just put all-purpose fertilizer around it. And dig that in a little bit and hope that it rains. We're scheduled to get a little rain in a day or so. Or I could water it. And I'll do that with all of my clumps of rhubarb. You can just barely see the center where the roots are, but this will start to unfurl the leaves in about a week or so, and even without fertilizer. And you'll see the rhubarb coming up. You can see a little red here. That will be a crop for us in May, and we enjoy it. Not everyone does, but we do like it. And so we'll be picking some of that at that time. I will mulch it around it with a little compost to give it some extra food. Again, it's a heavy feeder. The other fruit that I grow, I have 2 blueberry bushes in this area, and they need to be pruned. I've kind of put it off. And so I'm going to do some pruning of those. I use my rake to rake out around them. And then I'm going to take off some of the old stems. Now, some of the old stems have buds, but for the sake of the plant, I'm just going to cut off the old darker brown. Even though they have some good wood, I'm going to try to rejuvenate these bushes. We can just add those to the burn pile. And I'll go through here, and I think I have 3 more stalks to come off. It's going to leave a very small plant, but hopefully we'll get some nice new stalks coming up as the season progresses. The same with this one. I'll take out 1 or 2 of the oldest stalks. I think I'll probably take out the larger one on this one and leave 1 other for next year. By pruning blueberries, you may not get quite as many berries to set, but those that do will be larger if you can keep the birds out. They too are fairly heavy feeders, and they like acid soil. And so I'm going to add aluminum sulfate around these plants, which will acidify the soil. Our soil around here is pretty acid, but this will help, definitely help keep it acid. Which is what the blueberries really like. They are also shallow rooted, so you don't want to go too deep with your little fork here. Then I'll add some Hollytone, which is a fertilizer for acid-loving plants. For your rhododendrons, azaleas, hydrangeas, anything that likes a really acid soil. And I'll give that a good dose of that. And again, rake it in a little bit. And then I'll mulch this plant with either pine needles or peat. I happen to have some peat moss. Peat is not a very sustainable thing, but I already had some, so I will use it up. After that, I would be using pine needles I have an abundance of those, and they too are quite acid, and they will be a good mulch to keep the weeds down around the blueberry bushes. It's too early to plant anything outside right now as far as seeds go, but I have been planting things indoors, and as the weather gets warmer and warmer, I will be able to set up my little garden cloche with a little cover on it and move some of the seedlings outside to get a head start on the garden season. Now let's go back to the shade garden. In this part of the shade garden, spring is a good time for bloom, and there have been crocuses all over this area and little snowdrops as well. The crocuses that are blooming now they're an early crocus, Crocus tomasianus. They spread widely, which I love, and they're very early. They're often called Tommies, and they don't seem as attractive to the pests, although I do deer spray them, just in case one decides to come and munch the whole bunch. And I also have in this garden hellebores. Now hellebores are an interesting plant in that the bloom stalks are coming right now. In fact, they're almost in bloom. They bloom extremely early and when it's cold. However, they also have the ratty foliage from last year. So my job right now will be to cut off any of the ratty foliage. After they finish blooming, they'll put on new foliage. So I can even take it all off, or at least that's tattered and broken. I have quite a few of them in here. They've spread quite a lot, and they'll have lovely pink flowers on them in a couple weeks, and the flowers will stay until about May. So they're a long blooming plant, and they come up very early. Again, keep taking these leaves off. They'll look a lot nicer in bloom, and it'll be easier to clean up around them, which I can do fairly early to optimize the view while they're in bloom. So by the time we meet next month, I'll have these all cut back, and the blooms should be in full flower and some of the foliage starting to come up. I've cleaned off a little bit of the shade garden, just enough to walk on the paths, but we have lots of leaves left. Many of these will just stay here and become part of the mulch. After all, in the forest, nobody rakes the leaves, and they all seem to melt away by June. I'm going to go back by the pond now. The pond has a little skim of ice still today. We've had some very cold weather, so I've still left the ice melter in. I think we're in for a few more nights that are going down fairly low, so I'm going to be leaving that in. And when the ice is off the pond, I've been skimming leaves. These will go right to the bottom and hamper the cleanup of the pond if I don't get them out of here. So each day I tend to come out and scoop them out and put them aside. Again, with the warm up tomorrow, be able to clear the whole pond once more. Right now they're stuck in the little skim of ice. The melter has worked, although it has stopped floating, so probably needs a replacement next year. But so far it's made it through the winter and kept my little hole in the ice. You can just barely see some orange blobs in the water, and those are the fish. And I was able to count them the other day, and I have all 6. So they all made it through the winter. And on the day that it rose to 70 degrees, I also had 2 green frogs sitting around on the rocks. They went back to where they're more comfortable, probably down in the mud, and will come out again when our temperatures rise, probably to that 70-degree level again. Once the ice is out of the pond, things warm up, I'll use the pond thermometer to check and see what the temperature of the water is. And when it gets reliably above 50 degrees in the water, I can start feeding the fish with a spring and fall formula food. It's a little more digestible. They haven't eaten all winter. They're just kind of in there and not really hibernating, but kind of in suspended animation as they slowly move through the cold water. They don't require food in the winter, but they will when it warms up. So once it's over 50, I can start giving them a little food. My shed has a glass or plexiglass side and warms up. So I've been able to put some plants out there. I took them in when the temperature dropped to 15, but I'm putting these back out. I have some kale and some arugula planted in this one, and there's enough sun. This year I put some jugs of water in to hopefully keep it a little warmer in here overnight. When the temperature drops below 20, I've been bringing them inside. But it's nice to have the sun during the day, and the house does warm up nicely. With a temperature of under 40 outside here today, I think it's about 38, 39 degrees, maybe up to 40. But the temperature inside is 65, and the sun really does warm it up. I've had days when it went up to 80 or 90 in the shed, as long as the sun was coming in. I can also cover the shed at night. I picked some pussy willows and had them in water until they bloomed and formed their little pussy willow, and they rooted in the water. So I've put them in a pot and stuck them in the shed, and I'll be able to plant those somewhere outside in the garden and have more pussy willow bushes. I think there's 4 or 5 of them that have rooted. But I'll just keep them in here and keep them watered, and they'll grow. Cleaning the shed and getting out the lawn furniture, that too needs to be delayed a little bit, but hopefully by the first part of April, first or to middle part of April, I'll be able to get out the lawn furniture that's stored in there and do a little cleaning and get ready for more summer activities. Now let's move up to the patio area. I've been feeding the birds, and the birds do need some food. We're starting to see birds traveling north to their breeding areas, many of which are in Canada, and they need a little food along the way. So I keep feeding the birds for at least another month or 2, possibly more, with some of the other feeders. I like to hang some plants out here. But I've seen bluebirds. I've had several bluebirds at the feeder, and I'm going to put in one of these suet cakes. They're high energy, and the bluebirds, I've put these out before, and it seems to attract the bluebirds. So having seen them out here in the last couple of weeks, I thought I'd add this one to my feeder. My patio is a mass of bird seed. Most of it is not edible seed for the birds. It's just the hulls. And those will be cleaned up. Shop Vac does a good job. And I fill this one almost daily. I've had probably 4 pair of cardinals around all winter, blue jays, tufted titmice, Carolina wrens, and all kinds of other birds, a variety of sparrows, song sparrows. Now they're starting to be making a lot of bird noise out in the woods, and their interests are starting to turn to other things, like building nests. I have put out a little metal container, container. Actually, it was originally for the birdseed cakes, and into it I put the fluff that I collected from the milkweed seeds last fall. This will help them in their nest building efforts. And so I've hung that out near my garden, and we'll see if they come and start taking that. Bluebirds nest really early, so if you have bluebird houses, make sure that they're empty, clean, and ready for the bluebirds now, because they're one of the first birds to nest, and they need the houses ready early. Wrens will be back about the first part of May, so if you have wren houses that you put out, you've got a little time left. But you need to get ready for the bluebirds now. Here we have a chickadee that comes down. The chickadees are very friendly little birds, and they don't really mind having you around and fairly close. This area of my garden warms up really quickly. I've got the glass on one side and the bricks on the other, and both of those hold some heat. So the bulbs that are planted in here bloom really early. I don't have to worry too much about rabbits and deer up here, so close to the house. But I will start doing some fertilizing. And again, not right on the plants, but around them. I've got tulips, daffodils, and these crocuses. The crocuses tend to be very early in this garden. These are even the later variety of crocus, and they're already in bloom here. So I'll add a little fertilizer. The foliage that's growing now will feed the bulb underground that will provide next year's blooms. So we want that foliage to be well nourished so that we'll have blooms next year as well as this. So that's why I add the fertilizer at this time. I'll go around to all my bulbs as they come up and add a little bit of the bulb fertilizer around them. General all-purpose fertilizer will work too if that's what you have, but the bulb fertilizer is formulated to help grow good roots and bulbs for the bulbing plants. We'll enjoy them as they come out, and they'll be in bloom. Many of these are early tulips, which will be blooming in April and May. Sometimes they're even out for Easter if Easter is late. But I've gotten out a few of my lawn ornaments. I got out a nice little frog over here, a little angel in the other garden, and slowly those things will come out of the garden shed and join my gardens as they mature. Now let's go inside and do some planting of seeds and also some preparations for Easter. Today I'm planting some seeds, and I'm going to plant some in the winter seeding container. And what I'm using are milk jugs, which have been cleaned and cut, leaving a little hinge. And then I make holes in them with an ice pick, or you could use a screwdriver, heated screwdriver, or a nail and a hammer. And you put holes in the top and the bottom, and you take off the lid. I've filled it with soil, and I'm going to plant in this one some Prairie Sun Rudbeckia, which is a perennial plant. Actually, it's a biennial plant, but it should self-seed once it comes up. It probably won't bloom this year, but hopefully if we get some good strong plants, it'll bloom next year. So I'm going to just spread the seeds and pat them in lightly. They are very fine seeds, so we're just going to pat them in. Then I'll close it up, and I want to make sure I put another label inside as well as outside, just in case the first label wears off. And then I'm going to close this up with a piece of duct tape. And then we'll put it outside, and it'll join the others that are out in the garden. The other way of seeding is to use seed starting equipment, and these are cell packs that I've had for a long time, and they're cells that you fill with soil, and they sit on top of a frame with a piece of fabric over it that wicks water from the bottom chamber under the seed and waters them from the bottom. And for these, we're going to plant two kinds of peppers. New Ace peppers, these are green peppers, and we'll put one or two in each of the little compartments and push it down and cover it with seed, cover it with soil, and then we'll do 6 of those, and then 6 of the piecework sweet peppers. And again, we'll put a couple in each one and cover it slightly with seed. I want to cover it about 3 times its depth, and they aren't very big. So we can just cover those and pat them down well. And then this will be covered with a clear plastic dome, and I'll put these under the plant lights. These are tender seeds, tender seedlings that can't go out into the garden until after the danger of frost is all over. So we'll leave them under the lights to germinate and then grow into seedlings that we can put outside for a while in the sunshed, and then we can transfer them to the garden once the temperatures are warm, probably about the end of May. If you've grown amaryllis and had it bloom, when it's finished blooming, be sure to cut off the stalk, but keep the greens that are growing and let them mature. Keep them watered and fertilized. Plant them outside in the summer and let them continue to grow. Then in the fall, you can repot them and let them go dormant for a little bit and bring them back in the house to restart and bloom again next spring. I've also started a pot of basil, and the basil I hope to have a little that I can use inside and possibly some that I can transplant outside. I'll put some into smaller pots. This is pretty thickly planted, so I'll transplant a few of these into some individual pots. And again, once the weather is warm, and that'll be in May, probably about the middle to end of May, I can put it outside. I want to do two floral arrangements today, and one is based on the grass that we started in this wooden box container with a little plastic insert. We started this a month ago, and I've already mowed it once with my scissors. We can keep mowing it as needed. And I'm going to just use a little decoration in this of some colored eggs from last year. And we'll just kind of arrange those in there. And these had the insides taken out so that they would keep. And then I'm going to add a few little chicken decorations to go with the eggs. We ought to have them feet down, I guess. And we'll just put those around the edge. And that makes a nice little decoration for Easter. I'm going to make a centerpiece for my Easter table, and I'm using a moss wreath. I had hoped to make a wreath to hang with this, but it is shedding so badly that I'm using it on a tray around a little vase, which has the floral foam inside. And I got some flowers from the grocery store, and I'm going to add those, and I'm going to start with a ornamental cabbage, which I'm going to put in the middle. And then I have another large mum. These were just floral bunches. And I'm going to put that on the other side. Those are the two larger ones. And then I'm going to fill in with some of the other things. And I have two roses, which I can put in. And then some Gerber daisies. And I've put straws on these to hold them up. Gerber daisies are notoriously weak as far as not standing up straight. But if you do put a straw around the stem, before you set the rest of the stem into the floral foam or water, they will stand up a little better. This one needs to go a little deeper. There we go. This is kind of an assortment, and I've got some nice daisies to put in the middle. And then we can fill in with some of the smaller plants. And perhaps a little of the forsythia that I brought in to force into bloom. Just putting it in water is enough to force forsythia into bloom. And I'll take another little piece of this. And we have some little carnations to fill in. You can fill in with little baby's breath as well. fill in the design, and there's a few extra daisies that were a little too short. I'll tuck those in, and I have a few pussy willows too that we may be able to add. Here and there. Again, we want to keep it fairly low, but here's another little carnation. And this gives us a nice little arrangement for the table. And I'm going to add a couple little Easter decorations, little rabbits, to the cabbage leaves. I thought they would be appropriate for the cabbage leaves. And there we have an Easter centerpiece. The other thing I've been doing is coloring eggs with natural dyes. This one is made with red cabbage, and to make the natural dyes you use your plant material plus a cup and a half of water, and then you add a quarter cup of vinegar. You bring that to a boil and boil it for about 15 minutes to have the color come out of the material. And I've used for this one red cabbage, and red cabbage will give you blue eggs. And you just keep turning your eggs in the mixture. I've used hard-boiled eggs and also eggs that I've blown the center out from. You can do shells. Also, if you just have shells that you want to put a little chicken in or something like that. The vinegar sets the dye. This one was made with red beets, and again boiled with the water and vinegar for about 15 minutes. And this last one was onion peels, just the stuff that you normally would put in the compost from the onions, and it makes a lovely orange egg. I boiled the onion peels again, cup and a half of water, quarter cup of vinegar, and boiled for about 15 minutes. And you just keep turning them until you get the desired color. You could also put them in a pint jar or a wider container so that they were covered all the time. If you have eggs that are blown, they're hollow and they will float, like this one is floating. And you need to either fill them with the dye completely or just keep turning them until you get the color that you want. Now let's go into the kitchen and prepare some Easter brunch. We're going to continue working with some eggs, and this time I'm going to make pickled hard-boiled eggs. And for the one to make yellow pickled eggs, I'm going to add 1 cup of vinegar, 2 teaspoons of sugar, and 2 teaspoons of salt. That's kind of the basic mixture, and using white vinegar. And then to this, for the yellow eggs, I'm using about 3/4 of an inch of ginger root, 2 tablespoons of black pepper, and we're going to bring that to a boil. And while that's coming to a boil, I put 2 hard-boiled eggs into a pint mason jar. I also this morning worked on some other ones, and this one is going to be pink, and I used a beet. I used the basic recipe of 1 cup of vinegar, 2 teaspoons of kosher salt, 2 teaspoons of sugar, and then I cooked a beet and some 1 bay leaf and a chopped shallot, and I poured that while warm over those eggs. On this one what I made, which will be purple, and I used red cabbage, caraway seed, and we added a teaspoon of baking soda, and we added another teaspoon after the first one dissolved. Now this one you want to do in the sink because it foams up all over the place. So be sure to do it in a sink or someplace so that it can run over when the baking soda is added. And these will be purple hard-boiled eggs, pickled eggs. Now we've brought this mixture to a boil, and I can cool it a minute, and then we're going to pour it right over the eggs, and you can see it's a nice bright yellow. We've got a 1/4 cup of turmeric in there to give it the yellow color. And then these are all going to go into the refrigerator, and we will wipe up. They'll go back in the refrigerator, and they can last in the refrigerator up to 5 days, but you need to leave them in there for at least 4 or 5 hours in order to have the color come onto the egg. The next thing I want to do is put together a breakfast casserole. We're going to do kind of a little brunch here, and this is all things that you could prepare the day before and have ready to put in the oven on Easter morning or anytime you want to make a nice little brunch. I'm going to make a casserole, and for the casserole I'm going to use ham and cheese. And we need to get out another bowl. Mix those items. And I'm going to put my recipe out so that I have my ingredients. I'm going to start out with a cup of ham, which has been cubed. This is fully cooked ham. And to that I want to add a 1/4 cup of green onions, about 2 tablespoons of red pepper, and 1 small jalapeno pepper, which has been chopped. And to that, I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of cheese. Now, I have another 3/4 of a cup of cheese right here, but we're going to save that. I did do the cheese, but I will save that to put on the casserole once it's baking. And I'm going to stir this together. And this will be the filling for these breakfast enchiladas. And then I'm going to use tortillas, wraps, and I'm using whole oat bran and flax and whole wheat wraps. And I'm going to make 4. You could make a larger recipe if you wished. And I have a pan here ready for them that I've greased. I'm going to put about a good 1/4 of a cup of the ham, cheese, and vegetable mixture on each one. Maybe more like 1/3 of a cup. Then I want to roll this up and put it in the dish, and we'll repeat that 3 more. And I'm folding in the ends a bit and then folding it over, adding it to the pan. We want about 1/4 of a cup of the mixture left in the pan once we get our tortillas all filled. I used a yellow cheddar cheese in this dish. Then I'll put any of the remaining on top of them. And then we'll be adding that extra cheese later on. The next thing we want to do is beat together 3 eggs 3/4 of a cup of half and half or whole milk. This is going to be poured over the top of our enchilada casserole. And then I'll put a piece of foil on top and put it in the refrigerator overnight, or at least for 5 hours. Fasten that tight. This is going to go in the oven when we're ready to bake it at 350 for about 40 minutes. And then we'll remove the foil, put on the rest of the cheese, and bake it just a few minutes until the cheese is finished. The next thing I'm going to do is a little hors d'oeuvre. It looks nice on a buffet table if you're having a little brunch buffet. And that's going to be some tomatoes. And I have made up a mixture of cream cheese, cream, and with a little salt, a little cayenne pepper, and herbs. I used 2 tablespoons of chopped parsley, 2 tablespoons of chopped scallions, and 2 teaspoons of dried dill. If I'd had fresh dill, I would have used 2 tablespoons of that. I mixed that together with my mixer, and then I took some cherry tomatoes, or grape tomatoes. Actually, a little larger one would have been nice, but the store didn't have them. And I've cut those with my knife. I've cut 4 slits, 2 crosswise twice, and taken the seeds out. And I'm going to use a pastry bag with my cheese mixture and fill them up and make little tulips. Here's another one. And we can put those on a plate. And you'll see they look like little tulips. And I've used the scallion greens for stems and leaves. You could use chives if you have them. It's a little too early in the garden for chives, but we can use these leaves for the mixture. We're going to put those in the refrigerator too until it's time for our buffet, and cover them with a little plastic wrap. The next thing I'm going to be doing is making some cheesecakes in the Instant. The next thing I'm going to make is dessert, and I'm going to make some little mini cheesecakes, individual cheesecakes, in the slow cooker, the Instant Pot. And I'm going to start out by making a crust, and for the crust I'm going to combine 2 tablespoons of melted butter, a tablespoon of sugar, and half a cup of crushed graham cracker crumbs. And I'm going to mix that around well until all the crumbs are moistened. If you wanted, you could add a little cinnamon or spice to this, or maybe a few finely chopped nuts, but we're just going with a very plain crust. And I'm going to add a tablespoon of the crust to each of 5 little tiny mason jars. They're a 1/4 pint, I believe. But they'll be just about the right size. They hold about a 1/2 cup. They'll be just about the right size for an individual serving of cheesecake. And I want to divide this among the cups, and they're just enough for the 5, which happens to be the capacity of the Instant Pot too for doing this, unless you wanted to double the recipe and stack them, which is possible. There's a little extra in there. The next thing we need to do is make a filling for these little cups. And to do that, I'm going to combine a 1/4 cup of sugar with 8 ounces of cream cheese. And we'll mix that well. And then I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And I always use the pure stuff. It is more expensive, but it certainly makes a difference in taste. And 1/4 cup of sour cream. I'm going to mix that just until it's nice and smooth. And then I'll put a couple spoonfuls in each cup. About the equivalent of 3 tablespoons. I just realized I forgot to add 1 egg. But I think they will turn out anyway. They just probably will be a little stiffer than they would be if I had added the egg. So be sure to add the egg if you're making these. The next thing I want to do is add 1½ cups water to my Instant Pot, and I'll add the rack that comes with the Instant Pot in the bottom. Then I want to cover each of these cheesecakes with aluminum foil tightly. Make sure it's tight. This is to keep any condensation from getting on the cheesecake itself. And I'll put those into the Instant Pot. And I'll lock the lid in place. And I'll set the Instant Pot for 6 minutes on high pressure cook, and then when it's finished I'll let the pressure go down naturally, which will take another 15 minutes or so until the little the little silver column drops and you know it's finished. And then you can remove them and let them cool at room temperature, and then refrigerate for at least 3 hours before serving. Before I serve them, I will do a little decorating with some coconut that I've put in a bag with some green food color and kind of kneaded it around to get the coconut color, and a few candy eggs. So I'll see you in the dining room when our brunch is ready. Thank you for joining me today for Easter brunch. We're all set up on the table, and this is our Easter enchilada casserole with ham and cheese, our little cherry tomatoes or grape tomatoes with cheese filling. I did cook some asparagus to go with the meal, and also a loaf of Armenian Christmas bread, or Easter bread. I think probably they cook it for Christmas too. But it's a rich, eggy, buttery bread. It's very good with jam, and I have some of my homemade jam from last year, the rhubarb and ginger jam that I made. We have the pickled eggs, and they came out really well. I'm very pleased with this. It's been a new recipe. I put them on a bed of parsley, but the colors really came out nicely, and hopefully the flavors did too. And our Easter cheesecake desserts, which I decorated with a couple eggs, chocolate eggs, and some coconut that's been dyed green. And of course our Easter centerpiece with a couple little bunnies in it. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable, and this has been